What I do is inconsequential. Why I do what I do is I get to shorten people's journeys every day. What I love about our hospitality industry is that it's our mission to make people feel cared for while on their journeys. Together, we'll explore what hospitality means in the built environment, in business, and in our daily lives. I'm Dan Ryan, and this is Defining Hospitality. Today's guest is a creative, strategic, and visionary brand storyteller. In his 30-year career, he's left an impact with leading luxury lifestyle brands in hospitality, food and beverage, design, and wellness. He's known by many as an invaluable strategist and effective leader for new concept development, launches, and brand reinventions. He's the vice president of food and beverage concept and brand development at Four Seasons Hotels and Resorts. Ladies and gentlemen, Michaell Doneff. Welcome, Michaell.
Hey, Dan. Great to be here.
It's so good to have you here. And this has been a long time coming. I just want everyone to know.
You've been very persistent.
Yes. And I
appreciate that.
I finally harpooned the whale. So call me Ahab.
Yeah.
So
I know. Thank you. I'm excited to do this. Sorry it took so long.
You know, you had a lot of big changes, and I'm really excited to talk about them. But first, I wanted to tee up, because obviously this is defining hospitality. And I think more than many, I actually might say the vast majority of the guests, I've had dinner with, we've met up, we've worked, we've perhaps been at a conference together. We've had many of them, some sort of a shared experience, which is why I enjoy them, and we laugh and we have a good time. There's like a really deeper personal connection. But I was at a very important milestone birthday for you. And I forget the name of the house up on the PCH next to the Getty. Please help me.
Villa
Leon. I've driven past it 1,000 times. I've always been fascinated by what that was. But going in there with 60 or 80 of your closest friends, of people who are most important to you, and I know that I only got the ticket because of my wife, Alexa, but it was so meticulous and so incredibly thought out. And it was probably one of the best and most incredibly planned and executed soirees, dinner parties, birthday parties I've ever been to. Not only was the view amazing, you can't mess with that, but just everything from the table settings to the cutlery to the table runner to just how thoughtful the seating arrangements were. And even though I don't know how many people were there, but it felt like there were 15. So I don't know. And I think that this kind of ties into your superpower of what you're doing now with Four Seasons and has served you incredibly well along your whole life journey, career journey. And I would just say life in general. We've had dinner before, we've hung out before, but that was just such a spotlight into who you are and who you surround yourself with. And I was just honored to be there. I mean, it was something that I will never, ever forget.
Yeah, you and Alexa were important additions. I mean, it was because it was at the end of the pandemic, sort of, we thought it would be. And it was just the moment, because so many of my friends had not been in an environment like that. And it's just, we all wanted a celebration. We wanted a party, and I thought there's so much wrong in the world. Like this feels so right. Yeah. And so I wish I could do that every year, but it was a lot of work. But I'm glad you enjoyed it, because that, for me, when you ask about defining hospitality, and I wish we'll get to that in a minute, but I think that's kind of it. Like I love the small touches. I love those things that maybe people don't notice, maybe they do, but just, I wanted it to be a celebration of you guys more than, and having appreciation of having you in my life, as opposed to like, let's celebrate me because I'm going through this milestone. But anyway, I'm glad you enjoyed it.
It was just phenomenal, just from sight to everything else. And If you were to look at that event as a microcosm for what's between your ears and your beautiful mind, how does that tie into what your definition or how you or what you feel about hospitality as far as like both giving and receiving, and also just setting the stage for everyone that's passing through?
I mean, I think for me, when I've thought about this in the weeks up to this now, to doing it, like, what does that mean for me? Because obviously it's been part of my life from being a kid and wanting to like help plan or host things. And just, I've always loved that world and that gesture of welcoming and hosting. But I think for me, it's the art of welcoming people into an environment or an experience that they feel comfortable, they feel understood, they feel appreciated, they feel heard. And then you create this experience, whether it's a dinner, an overnight stay, an event, you create this experience that they really, you give them more than they might have expected. And it doesn't have to be fireworks, but it can be the little gestures, or just things that like show thought, that show caring, that show authentically welcoming people. And we're in a world where you and I have stayed in a lot of hotels and experiences where you can tell it's kind of scripted. It's not from the heart. It's not just what they want to say. It's what they've been taught to say. And it always feels inauthentic. So I think having that genuine spirit. And it could be having friends over for pizza. It could be a gala event. It could be celebration. It could be a 3-star Michelin restaurant. It could be the corner French bistro on your street, which you just love going to. And you feel like you're home in a way. So that's maybe long-winded, but that's my uh, view on what hospitality is. And that's why I've loved being in it for so many years. Cause I think it's so fun
It is fun.
to do
And
that.
also just looking at being at that dinner and just seeing how many mutual friends and like what our tribe
Mm.
is. It's it it's so it's like 3D chess, right? It's like everyone. It was just an all-encompassing event where like so many people I care about um in this amazing stage. I want to go back to what you said when you were a kid. So you grew up in Minnesota, correct? It was very
Hmm.
cold, I'm sure.
In the winters. Yeah.
When you were a child or younger, the younger version of yourself, and you're thinking about or how did you know that this is what you were drawn to and that this was your superpower? And you're like, hey, this is what I want to do in my life.
I mean, there's two aspects. There's the sort of the hosting, hospitality, service industry, which whatever reason, I've always been drawn to. I used to help my mother when she would throw dinner parties. I would dress up as a waiter in like black and white and like have a towel over my arm and help serve, which I was like that nerdy kid who was doing these weird things, but I loved it. I thought it was really fun to be part of it, and she would make like chicken Kiev and all these like fun 70s things, which people don't really make for dinner parties anymore. So that was that part. But then travel has always been I've been so uh, enamored and infatuated with the idea of long, faraway countries, cultures, people, music, landscapes, beauty, history, all that things. And so, but growing up in Minnesota, I probably traveled when I was 14. I think that was the first time we actually got on a plane, went to Florida, which for me was like, you know, and that at that point, people dressed up for flights. And
Oh
so
yeah.
I had this like navy blue leisure suit with white uh, details and a leopard Kiana shirt. So that I was like styling for this first inaugural trip. So it's always been fun. Then I went to France on a 10th grade school trip and I fell in love with France and I went back for a junior year abroad. And so that was kind of the eye opening experience. This kid from Minnesota who'd never really seen anything outside of, and again, then we didn't have the internet. So there was a lot, TV, I guess, but you couldn't just Google your way to like exotic lands.
Mm.
So that's kind of where it started.
So, and then at what point, I guess having done that, I guess you did it for fun as a kid. and then you got the travel bug, dressing up on the plane. But at what point did you connect all the dots and realize that, wow, I could do this as a career?
It, I guess I didn't intend it. When I lived in, so after I got my degree, I went back to France after college and got a job in a restaurant, a Michelin restaurant in the South. And I met a lot of great people. I loved it. And after that summer, I did not want to come back
Mm.
because when my mother, she will never live this down, but when I needed the money to go to France after college, and I'd spent it all in Cancun, all my careful savings. And I said, I need a one-way ticket I have this job in this Michelin restaurant. She's like, why would you want to work in a restaurant in France when you're already working one in Madison, Wisconsin? So I was like, okay. So I borrowed the money from a friend and I went and I stayed for 3 years.
Where in the South was it?
It was in some small, I think it was Saint Paul de Dijon. So it was like some small town up in
Oh, in
Provence, like
Provence.
literally a
Oh, wow.
village. And there was this great restaurant there. Anyway, then I didn't want to come back. So they sent me up to Paris and introduced me to this guy, Jean-Pierre Coffe, who is now, he's since passed, but he was a TV personality. But at the time, he had restaurants in repertory theaters in Paris. So he said, I can give you a job. And so I worked as like a barman, and then I ended up managing the restaurants, weirdly enough, even though I didn't know anything about that. But he trusted me. And, so it was a quick crash course on restaurant management at that time. And I was like 23 or
Mm.
something. And so it was the restaurants of 3 theaters in Paris. So it was like, during the day, it was for the crew, but the actors when they were rehearsing. At one of them, there was a drama school, so there were acting students. And then at night, it was for the people who came to see the plays. And it was their repertory theater, so every night was a little different. So it was a fascinating experience. But I learned quickly about the restaurant, and I just loved that idea of hospitality and food and seeing people enjoy and putting together the elements of experience that people would come and enjoy. And you get a lot of, I get a lot of satisfaction from watching people enjoy things that I sort of helped
Mm.
create.
Did you ever, while working for a Michelin restaurant in France, get to say, "Don't get saucy with me, Bernays"?
I don't think I had that opportunity, but I'm going to use that next.
Credit Mel Brooks for that one. So actually, I'm really fascinated by the repertory theater. So the different types of people and age mixes that would come in and eat, and just I'm sure the stories and the joie de vivre and just all of that with all those actors and actresses coming around and being able to serve them. Like what were some of your favorite memories of that, or how did that type of I don't know, like crucible of people and personalities help influence your path as far as like brand development and really thinking creatively about trying to get out of someone's idea onto a tablecloth, if you will?
Well, working in that environment where you're just surrounded by creators or your people who want to come see a play or see a musical or see an opera, that was pretty incredible to be. And then doing this, getting paid as a barman or bar manager and then a restaurant manager. And so, and it was long hours, but it was just fun because it was really interesting people. I met, kids who were acting students then, and now I've seen them, become French actors in cinema and directors, and just the exposure as a Minnesota kid, like stuck in this weird time warp of just in Paris and it was amazing. And I was very grateful to have that experience because it just changed my life. When you get that chance to go abroad or live abroad where nothing is a given. And then weirdly, I didn't choose hospitality or that restaurants as a career. I just, I worked in them because they paid. And then when I moved to New York after that, I worked in restaurants because you made great money, and tips. And then the hotel thing just kind of evolved to travel because travel is always a love. And then there was a job when I moved to New York for a receptionist in a PR firm. It was a travel PR firm. And I was like, I don't know what PR is, but travel, I can do travel. So I got it and kind of worked my way up in starting in PR and for destinations and companies and hotel groups and stuff. So that was my first exposure and got to go on press trips and, so again, I'm always like ready, the passport to go anywhere the opportunity arises. So
Have passport,
it
will
was fun.
travel.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah.
and I think just hearing these stories of just, I don't know. I feel like a theme that comes up often on this is anyone can get into hospitality. Anyone, because you can start washing dishes, you can start um, cleaning rooms, you can start serving people at a table, and there's great people like yourself and millions of others who have started in a career that way. But I also feel like if you look at the workforce now, where everyone's so starved for people and great people, especially in hospitality, it's amazing how with a drive and a desire to please, like in this kind of hospitality quotient idea that Danny Meyer has coined, the the jobs are there, and then the path to leadership management is so steep, and it's so easy to build a career. Well, nothing's easy, but there is a very sharp career path that I think a lot of people tend to overlook. But it's not like if you start serving as a table server, as a bartender, or as a barback, you're stuck in that. And that's what I'm seeing and what I see in design, hotel management. Everyone starts in one place. So many people think that they're corralled into this one path once they start on that, but no, it's really just a door open. In every restaurant, every hotel, they're just like these laboratories of business and revenue streams, and there's so many different things that you can get involved in that with a brain and a work ethic, I don't know, it's a pretty awesome career. And most of the people I talk to like yourself, they all seem to stumble into this field by accident. It wasn't by design. What are your thoughts on finding on like this path that I guess this career path that hospitality offers?
I mean, you're right. It is, you can go in from any aspect, whether it's design or ops or culinary or beverage or, I mean, there's a lot of ways in. And I think, again, I stumbled into it, but I think what always drove me back to it um, was the just love of this, both travel and the art of hospitality. It's just like the gesture of hosting people, of creating environments or creating brands or concepts that people, then you can actually watch people like enjoy and to write about until like it becomes this thing, and I've been fortunate to be part of a lot of early stage brands and being part of see how they come to life, and creating the name and then the logo and then the name takes on its own uh life, and just to watch that process, it's really fun because you mentioned storytelling. I mean, that's probably my favorite term for all of this because it is really kind of like you're creating little mini stories, and I love thinking how that looks, how it sounds, how it feels, like all those little things, and that, and I'm doing a lot of that over and over again now,
With
which
Four Seasons?
yeah, I get to create so many new things all over the world.
Well, and I want to get to Four Seasons because also just looking at your path from, you know, I don't know, SBE to I guess you were at Canyon Ranch, and then
Mhm.
Jose Andres, you were at Viceroy.
Viceroy. Mhm.
Now to me, Four Seasons is like definitely is like the top of the top, right? But along your journey, um, what was one of those concepts where maybe not so much a new one with a clean slate, one where you came in where they were kind of like, okay, we think we have this, but something's not working. We got to bring in some new ideas to kind of reposition what we have going on. And what's a story, like a success story about somewhere where you came in and helped reposition with success, and it just kind of reaffirmed your belief in your superpower and what you do?
Hmm. One fun thing, I mean, there's been
I'm sure there's been more than one.
several of them, but one fun project which I worked on, which it was a resort. It is, I think, still a resort in Bermuda, which the actor Michael Douglas owns. His family's from Bermuda. His mother's from Bermuda. Um, and they came to us when I was working in, I guess, in PR at the time with Susan Magrino agency. And they he had met Susan and said, I have this family property and we need some help with it, and so we went down there and it had been designed I guess it was in the 90s, but it was very 90s. There's like really not great floral patterns, and just the branding was very like, it wasn't great. And so we actually said to him, well, if you're not changing things, I don't know what we can do from you, because there's really no story here. It's not relevant, especially to the audience that we can help access for you. So we said, but can we just propose something? So and we saw some of the historical photos and collateral and stuff from this property in the 60s and 70s, and it was really cool. It was just like classic Bermudan like style, and the property had good bones. But so we said, can we suggest going back to that and kind of a refresh of that? And so he said, sure, I'm all ears. So we connected with the designer, who was a friend of ours, Jeffrey Bilhuber in New York, and he agreed to sort of reimagine the interior design. And then we hired a friend of mine, Richard Pandiscio, who has a very successful design firm. And we said, can you go back to this original logo and just make it fresh? So we created this like kind of dream team of these people, and we completely redid the resort in a very like vintage kind of, honoring the past, but really fresh
Mm.
and new and lovely. And so we got a lot of success from that. I mean, the property was reborn. He was very happy.
What was it called? Or is it called?
Ariel
Oh, got it.
Sands,
Okay.
sorry. Ariel Sands. I think it's still around, and I don't know if he's still involved with it, but it was in the family, and he has and family in Bermuda is very important, and they have generations, and he had all these cousins there. And so it was really fun just to learn what the essence of that property needed to be, and really kind of taking off all this stuff that had been added over the years since it opened, and bringing it back to a really modern version of its original identity. So that was
So
really fun.
I find that interesting, and this actually has come up in a couple of conversations recently. Um, okay, so if you think about a PR company, right? What you just explained is outside of the bailiwick of a typical PR company, right? It's like, okay, you're
Yeah,
in your lane, you're helping to get us press and promote us and blah, blah. But there's so many people, whether it's PR, design, architecture, even management operations, where you're brought in to do one thing, but
right.
but you see the opportunity because maybe you have, I don't know, a fresh perspective, or you're just like, oh, these guys aren't seeing it. But when you come up with against someone like, not against, but when your client is someone like Michael Douglas and his family, I'm sure that they have very specific opinions, and it's a hard, I don't know, it could be a hard or difficult conversation to have. If you were to use that example of, how did you get up the courage to say, you know what, I think you might be looking at this the wrong way, and sell them on a different vision? And how have you taken that, whatever that skill set was that gave you the gumption to do that, how have you applied that in other areas of your life and career?
I don't know how we did it. I guess we were just, because Susan and I talked about it, and we're like, oh, because like
Was
we
it
have
Alan's idea?
no, Alan wasn't really worked in travel that, but it was really me and Susan. But Alan has been now she's a huge part of the agency. She's always has been. But I think, I don't know. We just Susan and I and Alan have a very frank relationship, but they're like family with me. And we just we can't do this. We see it. Like we'd worked with other hotels like Chris Blackwell and Island Outpost and very style driven hotels. And we knew that we couldn't really help them. They could go to some PR agency and they could probably make great noise for them, but it would never be this game changing thing. And for some reason, he bought it and he liked it. And so he said, because we'd never done this before. I had never done it before, but we just felt like we knew, and we knew people who could help us assemble this team to create all
Did
this
you
stuff.
tell him that you'd never done it before, or you're just like, no, I got it, go?
No.
Okay. Fake it until you make it.
Basically.
Okay. So, but that's a huge coup, if you will, as far as breaking out of your lane, right?
Yeah. Cause I started in PR, but I always knew that it wasn't creative enough for me. Like PR is great and I love the storytelling aspect and I love the communications and the relationships and the positioning of a thing and guiding it. Cause I always loved that about PR, but again, at the end of the day, for me, PR, there was no concrete example that I could point to and said, I helped do that. Like you help writers write a story or film something and you have a way of, you have an invisible footprint on that coverage. But anyway, I don't know. It's something I always loved and I knew I wanted to do. So little by little over the next years and decades, I got more into that creative space. And we actually used the Ariel Sands success story as a way into W. Because W, I read a Crane's New York business story in, I guess it was the early or mid 90s about Barry Sternlicht starting this, Starwood group, and he had hired Rande Gerber to create the bar for the whiskey bar for this first hotel in New York. And I was like, this guy, and it was sort of after the Ian, it was like the next level of what Ian had done, Ian Schrager. And so this guy's onto something. So I'm going to write him a letter because there was no email.
You wrote Barry a letter.
I wrote him a
Handwritten
letter
or typed?
and I said I typed it. Yeah, I signed it though. And I don't know how I even got an address, but I just wrote him a letter from us. And I said, this is what we've done. We just did this hotel for Michael Douglas and we'd love to just be a part of what W is doing because it sounds really exciting. And he actually responded. He asked for a meeting and he asked actually this woman, Hillary Billings, who at the time was helping launch W from a design standpoint. And so she met with us and they hired us to do the initial PR, but also help with the branding. So based on this letter, we got W as a client when there was no one had heard of it. And I was talking earlier about the name, being part of that, W was, when it first came up as a idea for the name, I was like, well, that's a code name, like Project X or something. It's just a thing. But then look at W, people don't even think twice about, there was a lot of discussion at the time, but that was not the best name for a hotel chain, but now it's kind of iconic. So just to see that trajectory, that was really fun to work on. And that's where I met amazing people like Teresa Patino and, just got into that world in Ave. And that's how I met Alexa. So thanks to W, I know you.
Wow. Well, thanks to Barry Sternlicht. Actually, someone was asking me the other day who a dream client, or not dream client, a dream guest on this podcast would be. And it would be Barry. I mean, aside from you, Michael, but really Barry Sternlicht. I'm just and I've met him a couple of times. I think when I was working with Steve Higgins way back in the day in San Francisco, he came in the office. I met him there. I met him at some other charity functions, I think for juvenile diabetes, so he was like a keynote in that. I think he's very involved in that. I think it was juvenile diabetes. But just the way that he approaches and looks, much in the same way that you jumped out of your lane from PR to create that Ariel Sands and kind of turn Michael Douglas's idea on his head and deliver on it, he also just looks in different places for what's next. And I think so often we're all going back to the same trough, if you will, to create something new. But I don't know, his track record is pretty amazing. And it's who else has you written a letter like that to and gotten a response from?
No one. No one. I don't think so. I mean, who writes letters anymore? But the fact that it got to him and he actually took a chance on
Yeah.
us,
I bet a letter would stand
so
out
yeah,
more than anything right
I
now.
think so now, probably, yeah, if you can get it to the
I always
person.
like writing letters.
Yeah,
Uh,
I do too.
Um, okay, so then thinking about kind of what he created in W and how iconic that was at the time and how the name it has endured. Um, you're coming into an iconic brand, Four Seasons, arguably
Mhm.
one of the best hospitality experiences out there. Um, how did you know that the time was right for you to take this next step to be with such an incredible and storied group?
I don't know. It just kind of the opportunity arose for me as a consultant into that space leaving, after leaving Jose Andres, working there for many years and then pandemic and then trying to look at what I would do next. And I think I've always been a huge fan of that brand. It's just kind of like the gold standard in so many levels, which I just never thought it would be, it was never in the cards. But then this opportunity came and I was like, I think I could do that. I mean, I've worked with a lot of other brands on the agency side from and in-house, like One and Only and Peninsula and St. Regis. And so over the years, I've had access to, but I've never worked for a company this big
Mhm.
before. So yeah, that's a new experience, which has been really fun. Um, but yeah, I don't know. It just seemed right. And for my point in my career and all the things that I've done over the years have like led me to like this makes sense for me, I
Mhm.
guess. Um,
Um,
because I've most of my work has been with entrepreneurs, founder, visionaries, leaders, which has been really fun, a wild ride with all these amazingly creative people and just so this is different. But it's really great because it's such a group of smart
mm,
people and who truly understand
mhm,
hospitality. I think in that art of I've gone to maybe 20 properties now in the last year or so and just seeing it like, companies create brands and mission statements and brand words and things and I've been a part of a lot of them. But it's always nice when you go in the field and you actually see this what the company's saying from above as a brand level, like that actually is true, and it's people, these teams live it every day,
mm. And
So,
if you, from a storytelling PR perspective, helping come up with mission statements and values, I know it. I find so often, especially in hospitality, that it can ring so true on a poster. But when you're coming up with these kind of value statements and words, I find often, actually, I would say maybe more often than not, that there's an inconsistency between what that vision and what the
mhm,
vision and values are, and then when you're actually on site. When you
mhm,
come up with in the past, when you've come up with these ideas and decks and visions and values, what else? Like you do you come up with them, you move on, or you're sticking around. How do
mhm.
you help keep those on track as the person who comes up with the idea? Because I assume it has to come from the people within, but is it often just words and not meaning? And then is that like a when there's that disconnect, it's like, okay, well, that's time to go.
Well, I think it depends on the company culture, but I think the intent is always that this is it. And that's if a brand, and I've been part of many brands, but if it's constructed correctly and thoughtfully, I think that it's meant to last, right? But it's only as good as every execution of it, right? Some GM at a property might at some point say, "Oh, really, I like the color purple. I think we should just change this logo to purple because I think that's going to be," or I saw it on a trend report, whatever. So little like death by a thousand cuts, little things happen. People make decisions they think are the right ones, and you lose a brand loses its way, which I've seen that in some that I've, worked with long ago, and you see how they've evolved. Some it's good, some it's just, it's kind of sad because you see them have lost that original. But I think it's hard because it's every decision has to honor that core, even if it's a solid core that has been thought through. People change, regimes change, leadership changes, the field, the people at the front line change. So it is hard. I think one thing that I always tried to advocate for was internal comms as well as external, and they have to be aligned because a lot of companies sometimes have uh it's all clear to the outside and the PR and the messaging and the design and everything, but then it's not reflected in the staff training.
Agreed. I find that I find just in, with entrepreneurs and businesses that are trying to scale, that they have these values, they're projected to the outside, they're on posters, but they don't become part of the lexicon or the everyday language
Yeah.
of the teams. And I've gone through some really cool exercises where, we'll have values and we'll share a core value story about someone on our little team in our huddle. And then
Yeah.
you'll notice, or we would notice that like some of the values aren't being used very often. So we'd have a thing where it's like, okay, share something about the value that's not being used for this week and just see. And then what we found was the ones that weren't being used either weren't the right value and it needed to be changed or omitted. No, that's what it was. We found that it wasn't the right value. It had to be changed or omitted. And I find that also giving, instead of giving positive feedback on something, it's also, hey, let's do a week where we're giving negative feedback on someone who maybe fell down in a value. And
Hmm.
how what are some good examples that you've seen on your path where the values that are kind of come up that have come up on a whiteboard, let's say, then get printed and become part of the propaganda? But what's a good example of where it becomes part of the lexicon? And what do you think um, at a management level is being done to promote that conversation?
I think the first example that comes to mind for me is working with Jose, Andrés, which, obviously his humanitarian side has just exploded in what he's done for the world. But, it all started from this mission statement for Think Food Group, which is what the company is to be called. And it was changing the world through the power of food. So that's been on the wall. It's the motto. But one thing I know while working there is that guided a lot of decisions, and it was always that thread through everything. If this isn't doing well for people, feeding the few, feeding the many, that kind of lens
Hmm.
was really consistent everywhere, and then now, and then, that was when I was there was World Central Kitchen was just starting to emerge as a, we've started very small, but then with Puerto Rico and Houston and a lot of other events that they just really jumped into that caused it to just grow. And now they've so much has happened there. But I think that's one example of how that thread um, carries through. And also, I mean, Canyon Ranch, I worked there for a few years, and that's another organization which has been around since the 70s. And it was, was very founder led about his own health. So Canyon Ranch, like, it's all about it started with his own wellness journey. And then it just, the, the mission that people live and work by there, it's just amazing. And the transformations I saw people coming through their programs, whether it's a week or it's a month or, whatever the journey, loss, post cancer, like just a lot of things people came there with, and they were really I don't want to say healed, but they were emotionally healed and just taught mechanisms for how to live their life more fully or get over the trauma that they've been experiencing. So it's always been very fun to work in an environment like that where it is
Mhm.
hospitality, but it's also you feel like you're serving a greater good as well.
Yeah. I feel like it's, and I've not met Jose, but I would imagine that it's and other visionary founders. I love how you said that earlier, where I think part of what makes them so visionary is that they're single focused on whatever their gospel is, right? And that was
Mm,
probably the way for Jose. And actually, that's a great another interesting path to go on in this discussion. So, working at Four Seasons and being the gold standard, what do you think separates, and not just Four Seasons, but any of the companies and people and visionaries that you've worked with on your path, just good hospitality from exceptional hospitality?
I think it's the for me at least, it's the small thing that touches, that most people like. People expect wonderful furnishings, great food, checking the boxes, talking about service versus hospitality, exceptional service, attentive, courteous, professional, anticipatory, all those wonderful things that service aims to be. But it's also the genuine warmth, the name recognition, the like you sense that these people love their jobs and they love the industry and they love taking care of the guest and they just you see it in their faces, and I think so that's an important key that I have. I think that makes all the difference because anyone can check the boxes and have, get your Forbes or your uh, ratings, your stars, your whatever. And I think that's a very technical precision, which is important and people do expect it. But even if you have on top of that a really emotionally intelligent approach, intuitive approach that really addresses all the things you wouldn't even expect,
Mm.
you know. I worked on the opening of One and Only Palmilla years ago, and the GM at the time was Edward Steiner, and I had never seen a GM like that who just taught his team such a- attention to detail. They have these codes when the driver, because it was 40 minutes from the airport to resort, and the driver would sort of communicate a number. I think it was 1 to 5 or something based on the mood and the sort of vibe of the guest, doesn't want to be, needs to be left alone, just wants to get to their room, chatty, wants to know everything. And then when the guest arrived at the property, like the, the team already knew how to approach them,
Mm.
and obviously you have your own intuition when you see them and you read the signs, which I think is key to successful hospitality. But they had that extra sort of system behind the scenes that the guest was never aware of. So you didn't have to, because we've all been in that situation where you're tired.
Mm.
You just want to get to your room and they're trying to show you how the TV works, and you're like, I got it, So over service is not a great thing either when you don't want it. So I think that nuance, they also have this when you would unpack, you would go to dinner on the first night, they would check all the colors of your outfits, and they would leave you a sewing kit with all the matching color threads to what was in your closet,
Really?
which yeah. I mean, but and who notices that? They never tell you that, but if you're in need of it, you might notice or you might just think it's, kismet that you happen to have the exact same thread you need to sew on this button that came off.
I
So that little things are just like that's the magic,
so it's all about meeting them where they are. I had a former guest on here,
Yeah.
uh, Arnie Malham. He wrote a book called Worth Doing Wrong. It's about building culture, funny enough, as we were talking about it, within companies. And whatever it is, it's worth doing wrong. But much in the same way that the driver from picking you up at the airport, um, they had a whole playbook on, is it the UPS guy coming in? Is it a client? Is it someone coming in for an office
Mhm.
tour? And they all had their own special way of meeting people. It was like,
Yeah.
"Do you want quarters for the vending machine? Here's, a fresh glass of water. Oh, here's a cool." Actually, this reminds me of the One and Only Palmilla pickup, but I think for the UPS guy, I might be wrong here. If it was a really hot day in Nashville, they give him like a wet towel or something to like cool his head off. Cause like he's the UPS guy, but he's part of your company in a way. He's there all the time. Um, and to be able to have gradations of a 1 through 4 or 1 through 5, that's actually
Mhm.
amazing because it just helps you meet them where they are. From on one end of the spectrum, don't show me how to work my television, to I'm here for my 20th anniversary or whatever, and I'm gonna make the most out of this, and I'm gonna take it all in.
Yeah.
Um,
You want to talk their ear off. Yeah. Or you just need someone that you've been stuck on a plane for 5 hours and you just want to talk to
yes,
someone. So I think that it's that nuance and it's that understanding of that. And like, again, it's not, you can train the steps or you can train the coding, but you can't train the intuition. I think that's about the
no,
hiring and the identifying the right people and the culture, I think, because culture is so important for the employees because we're talking all about the guests, but you really have to treat your team as well,
totally.
and just with Danny Meyer and, what I've read about his whole organization, it's like, it's all about the team before the guest even, because happy team makes happy guests. So it makes so much sense, but it's surprising how easy it is to forget that, I think, for companies. Like, it's more about the guest metrics and the satisfaction and yet not extending those same points of attention to the team.
Yeah, Danny Meyer is really amazing on that one because he does. It's interesting. He puts team first, then
Mhm.
guests, then supplier, then investors. There might be 5, I don't remember. But I feel like the
Yeah.
investors were towards the bottom on the priority list, which is really unusual because any business is supposed to serve its shareholders, but it's counterintuitive. If you're taking care of all the
Right.
other ones, the shareholders are going to benefit.
They're going to be happy. I mean, they want a successful undertaking, right?
So I want to go. One and only Pummy, I actually haven't thought about that. I must have been there 15 or 20 years ago. No, 15. But I remember being greeted by the driver, and he had a cold, super, super cold washcloth
Mhm.
because it was so freaking hot down in Cabo. And just that was stunning. Then we just had an incredible time there. I didn't notice the thread, but one of the things I do remember, and it was such an incredible touch, um, at checkout, you sit down, like it's a low desk, and they sit you down in this beautifully, I don't know, it was like a leather, very plush leather chair with pillows and blankets on it, and it was very air conditioned. And they hand you this leather folio, and when I opened it, I nearly
Mm.
had a heart attack because I forgot it was in pesos, but it was like 20,000 pesos, and I thought it was $20,000, and I was like, "What?" Uh,
Uh,
and I was like, "Okay, well," and then I figured out, I was like, "Well, great," but I was also like, "Well, that's really nice that they're actually sitting you down when they hand you the bill, so you're just."
so you can't
I was way
say.
more
Um,
calm. God, that place is amazing. I miss that. Yeah.
it is. I haven't been there in a long time, but yeah, that it's a really special place.
Um, as you look forward and looking back on your career and then kind of seeing where you are at Four Seasons, which, as you said, is the gold standard of hospitality, or a gold standard, the gold standard. And you've been traveling to how many different countries and hotels?
About 20 properties in the last
In
year and a half. Yeah.
10 countries, 8 countries?
Yeah.
Okay.
Probably. Yeah.
So as you're looking at kind of the work that's already been done there and then where you guys are headed, what's exciting you most about what you see out there?
I mean, the pipelines, we have 130 properties right now currently, but there's another maybe 30 in the works in the next several years. And they're in great places. And, that's just exciting to me to be able to be part of these things. And now, we're already working on properties opening in 26,
Mm.
27 beyond, as well as I also work on renovations and reconcepts for existing restaurants at current properties. So it's fun. It's just, I love meeting all the people from the different regions. And I think, and then we're working on the yacht, which is going to be debuting, I think, end of next year at the Jet. So there's a lot of fun ways to create food and beverage experiences, and then it's really fun.
Yeah.
I guess that's the best word, simple word. But so it's great to be part of the company at such a pivotal moment, I think, because it's maturing. Again, it still feels like a family company, even though it's big. But as like Marriott or Accor, like there's a lot of different brands within one organization, and this is one brand, which has been interesting too. It's that's their sole focus, and it's big, and there's a lot of people involved, but it's one brand.
If you were to go through the 130 existing properties and 30 that are the 30 that are going to get added, what's that, like a 20% growth over however long to go from 130 to 160. Each property has its own set of stakeholders from ownership. Well, I guess ownership, management, team, right? How do you navigate that? Like, much in the same way that whole idea with aerial sands, where they have one idea, an owner might have one idea, but you're like, well, have you considered this? Are you having those conversations across all of your properties? Or is it, or if ownership group has Four Seasons managing it, they're like, you know what? You guys know best. You do what you do.
Yes and yes.
Okay.
It really, every case is different. We have a lot of owners, and it's just different. It's based on their experience, based on the type of owner, whether it's family or it's institutional or it's, fund. So it really depends. There's really no generalization I could say, but it's every end of the spectrum, which makes it interesting too. It's one brand, but every hotel and every owner dynamic is different. So it really, I enjoy the challenge of figuring out what are the important pieces for that ownership, for that location, for that region, for that project, and how do we best achieve that? So it's fun.
And I know you've, like, for the yacht, for the plane, for all the different properties, I've heard you say fun a lot. When I think of planning out a party like you did for your birthday, I guess that there would be an element of fun to it at the beginning, like who's going to be there. But this is why everyone has their own superpower. Then I'm like, oh my God, the rest of the details are not fun to me. But when you look at the details and fun, like what in particular is fun for you in all of those small moments in the details of each of the varied projects?
I mean, I think it's the initial buy-in in the concept, because then once we get that green light, then we can go to suggesting designers and talk about OS&E and work on the naming and branding of the outlets. And that unlocks just a lot of really fun and great things for me. It's like the creative challenge in that, and how to differentiate them and working with great external agencies, whether designers or branding firms. I mean, it's so interesting just to craft all these different stories, and work with some really talented team. Like I said, I've never worked in a big company, but there's a team for everything, which is kind of fun. Like I used to do a lot of it, marketing and PR and design and myself, because it was much smaller universe. But this is like, there's data insights, there's product team, there's employee fashion, there's people for everything, but we get to leverage all these smart people into creating these projects. So that's been the real intrigue for me, and now that I've been with them for the year and a half, I'm seeing projects at different levels of completion because they take longer. So my first project that I've been intimately involved, I think opens in September.
Which one is that?
So I'm going to, in Florence, we have a new restaurant that we're creating. So that'll be sort of the first one that I've really been involved in to see through to the opening.
And is there anything that carries through to each of the food and beverage concepts within each of the 130 hotels? Is there a similar level of service? Okay, you could argue that, but is there a font or or a flower, or is there a symbol? Is there anything that ties it all together, or is each
Not
thing
really.
completely unique?
They're kind of different. I mean, obviously some concepts we replicated or tweaked into different settings, but I think there's certain concepts that have fine popularity, whether it's steakhouse or Italian. I mean, but there's so many nuances within any of those. There's really no standardization other than our standards, like for basics, that what we need in number of service stations, all that kind of stuff, ADA clearance, all those sort of more technical things. But there's really no, which is the fun part. Like, you don't have to. If I was working for a franchise or something where that's a very different game, right? Where everything has to look the same. You have to follow the standards, and it's a template that just gets cookie cuttered everywhere. I don't think for me, that would be as interesting, because you're just kind of replicating.
Right. One thing I've been hearing a lot about at conferences is this idea of dynamic pricing. As far as, if the bar's 3 people deep at a certain time, not saying this would happen at a Four Seasons where there's 3 people deep at a bar, but like if the bar is 3 people deep, maybe turn up the price on cheeseburgers to $75, or I don't know. To me, it's kind of cool. Like, I love capitalism, but it's also a little bit scary. But I guess it's a way of controlling supply and demand. Are you seeing that out there? It's a new idea to me. I didn't know that was happening at a restaurant level.
I'm sure restaurants do it. We haven't. I mean, there's been talk about just as an industry, but but everyone does it. Uber, airlines, like theater, like most every other entertainment or experience is you buy based on demand, and in restaurants that's never been the case yet. So could it happen? I'm sure it's happening in some places, but we haven't really looked into that at all. It's just it's different because people aren't used to it, and we don't want to appear like we're taking advantage of a busy time, or I mean, there are obviously a lot of science behind pricing,
I
but
think, to
it's
me, the
not something
biggest
that we're looking
impediment
at.
and annoyance with the idea, as it pertains to restaurants in particular, it's like you can't have a printed menu anymore, right? Or unless I'm not thinking about it. It's like you need to order from an iPad or your phone or a QR code, and I'm
Yeah,
like, no.
there's a lot of practical considerations that make that
Yeah.
hard.
Hmm.
Yeah, for sure.
Um, I want to go back to you in the bow tie with the towel over your arm as a kid. Um, or even you going out to Provence to work at a restaurant at some village in the middle of Provence. Um,
Hmm.
the Michaell that I'm talking to now has had this incredible journey. You're still on it. You're doing really cool things and reimagining all things F&B. What advice, if any, do you have for your younger self?
Um, I guess just believe in yourself, right? I think at that age, we all look back at us at that age or whatever, and you just were so not self assured. You questioning everything. I don't fit in, whatever, can I do this? Um, Now you know you can, and maybe you should have started knowing that earlier. So I think it's always, don't be afraid to ask, or to push a boundary, or to try something, because failure, I think everyone certainly at that age is so afraid of failure, because it means like you're a failure, but it just means that specific task or whatever thing didn't work out. There's millions of other tasks that, if you just change the dial, maybe it'll work, or maybe it's wrong. And, you pivot. Like, life is a series of like choices, right? And I guess that what I would have loved to known from the older me, to like just go for it. I mean, I did my share of it, but there was a lot of sort of trepidation
Mm.
along the way.
Well, I would also say that we may not have Michaell Douglas in our life, but we all have a Michaell Douglas character in our life. Something that I find that
Yeah.
oftentimes where there's trepidation, to use your word, or a fear of someone saying no. But to me, I always think that no is just information, right? And it's okay if Michael Douglas said no, well, I'll find another one and I can do it there, or I'll
Hmm.
adjust whatever my approach was. No, and I
Yeah.
think that the more times that we're all having no said to us, the more times I think we're believing in ourselves and trying to sell someone on a different vision or a different path. And that's good. Someone might not be ready for that, but I think I'm just going to walk away from today being encouraged to just go for 5 more no's every day. You know what I mean? Because maybe we'll get a yes. Um,
Yeah.
and I think that looking back, I agree with you. I think we don't need to be kind of pigeonholed, and just being able to look at things differently and share our vision with someone else. It might be a no, but I tell you, the times that it's yes, it's life changing, right?
Hmm. It's worth all the no's
Yeah.
before then, you know? Yeah.
Mm,
I like the analogy of a ninja, like you're just stealth and you're like maneuvering and like the obstacles, like you can like jump over them or you can duck underneath them. It's like just kind of like be very stealth and just keep
mm,
going. It's like because, you know, there's always a way. There's always a way to like, and again, if you come to a brick wall and it's like there's just no way, then you move. Like you change your Jose used to say, or he still says, I'm sure, if your recipe doesn't turn out, or if your dish doesn't turn out, just change the recipe or something, or rename the recipe. So it's like this is actually how it should be. Like, so it's that kind of like just doesn't
yeah.
matter.
Or if you're at that brick wall and you're a ninja, you just throw the grappling hook up and climb over it.
Exactly. Exactly.
Um,
There's always a way.
Michael, I love our conversation. I love you. You're amazing. I love Theo in the background
I love
barking
you.
because we all need a
Oh my
Theo.
God.
By the way, the dog is Theo.
I know.
Um,
Good name.
it's a great name. Everyone needs a Theo in their life. If you don't have one, go get
They
one.
do. Amen.
Um, if people wanted to learn more about what you're up to and what you're doing at Four Seasons, what's the best way for them to find out?
Um, that's a good question. I think probably LinkedIn is probably
Great.
the best way to reach
Cool.
me.
And we'll put that up
I'm
in the show
open to
notes,
all.
and
Yeah.
we'll put some Four Seasons stuff up there. And also, if I can find anything on Aerial Sands, I'll put that. Maybe I'll get some pictures. I don't know if you have any old before afters. That could be kind of fun to
They
drop in
do.
there.
Yeah.
Um, this has been amazing, and thank you. And I've been looking forward to this conversation for so long, and I'm glad we connected.
Sorry it took
And
so long. I'm glad it finally happened.
yeah, and also thank you to our listeners, because without you, we wouldn't be growing as much as we have. And also, I signed up
Yes.
or started up a Friday 5 newsletter, 5 bullet points, featuring the current episode, a past episode with like a little nugget of there, and then other just like things I find interesting that can help pay forward all the learnings that I've gotten from talking to amazing guests like Michael here. So please sign up. It'll be in the show notes. But thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you, Dan.